What's up, everybody? I'm Max. I work at SideFX, and I was planning on originally doing this live, but fortunately, I was talked out of it because I like doing live presentations. I really don't like doing slideshows. It's hard to. If something goes wrong, you're screwed. But anyway, whatever. I'm gonna do this as a slideshow. Try to keep it entertaining. Hopefully, this could be short. I think it's gonna be like 15 minutes. But what we're going to talk about is how to make this, which is a jack-in-the-box, right? But not just a jack-in-the-box. We're going to do it in Houdini 22. So, yeah, why don't we go ahead and watch the actual animation first, and then I'll talk about how I went about making it. There we go. Charming, right? Thanks, everybody. Wow, I was not expecting applause. So yeah, we're just gonna let the animation play out for a little bit. I'm gonna talk over it, but the idea here, well, I mean, Fiona came up and asked me to make something, and I figured, what better than a jack-in-a-box to kind of illustrate some of the new features, the animation features in 22. Because what's really cool here is that there's really just a couple of keyframes driving this whole thing. I think maybe 2 keyframes. And the rest of it is just coming from, whether it be Ragdoll, secondary motion, and everything is dynamically driven from just that base animation. So let's talk about the rig, actually. If you're here for rigging, sorry to disappoint you, but this rig is actually very, very simple. The doll, really, it's just like a very simple FK setup. Well, what's nice is that everything in the doll is driven by all that dynamic motion, right? So I really had to do very little for the doll. On the box, it's a little bit different. Pretty much just FK for the most part, but there was one little trick that I actually had to do to get this to work. So like, as I mentioned before, the majority of the box is just FK, right? Just a little twisting motion, opening the top, that's just FK. But when it came to actually animating the spring, I needed to animate these spiral joints, right? But obviously I couldn't animate it like this, just lifting up one joint at a time. So what I needed was like a center line to go down these, to go up through the spiral and then grab onto those joints. So if you guys ever wondered how you can animate a spiral or rig one, this is actually how you're gonna do it. So you take these existing joints and you just crunch them down, right, in the X and Z axis, and you just leave your Y. And then you have your center line. And then obviously you want to change the names of those, right? So you go through and change all the names. And that gives you that nice center line. And then you just go through and just reparent everything. So this is just 2 different groups. I'm not going through and reparenting, one by one. If you throw down a parent joints node and you group 1, right? So I have a group as the center joints and then another group for the radial joints. And because they share the same point number and they have the same number of joints in each group, it automatically just parents every one of them. So it's pretty quick. It's really just just 2 different groups, and the parent joints node just takes care of the rest of it. So here's the final result of that. So yeah, you can see now just by playing with that Y-axis, I can really get that that springing motion. So, okay, these 2 models were made completely separately. And this is kind of like the initial problem, right? I actually had to combine both of these rigs. So, everything was modeled in Houdini, textured, whatever. But, all the skinning, everything was like done completely separate from each other. So I actually had to go through and combine these rigs. This is obviously very easy. All I had to do was just take the doll and just put it into position. And then yeah, once the doll is in position, I just parented the root joint of the doll to the last joint of my spiral. And just a note here, it's a good idea to do this outside of Apex, right? I'm not in Apex yet. It's a good idea to do it with KineFX, because once you actually go into Apex after doing this, all of your matrices are all set up, right? You don't have to go through and, I don't know, do any crazy matrix math to kind of, you know, like because when you're parenting things can get a little tricky when you're in Apex. So when you're doing it in KineFX, it kind of just takes care of all of that for you. So yeah, pro tip, do all your parenting in KineFX first, and then jump into Apex. Typically, that's the way I like to work. So after that, it was just a matter of plugging in the geo and the joints into an Apex pack character node. And then, of course, you want to turn on FK and Bohm deform components within the actual pack character node. And then, yeah, I had my like 90% of my rig done. So the next step I needed to do was to create that spline, right? So I tag that center line, right? Called it coil. And then I throw down an auto rig component. And using the spline, I select that coil tag, which creates the spline going down that vertical joint chain. So then I just go through and I set the curve order to 3, the control count to 3, and it just gives me the spline that I need. So the rig is pretty much done at this point. But now we're moving on to arguably the most important part of this process, and this is actually creating the ragdoll. So a lot of what you saw in the final animation depends on the ragdoll and like getting it right. So it's important to do this correctly. So the goal is to get this, right, which is the final ragdoll model. So it's just a simplified representation of your high resolution geometry. So it's like a proxy, and it just serves as a nice proxy so that the ragdoll sim can just run nice and smooth. The problem is that the model is made up of lots of different pieces, and Ragdoll typically doesn't like this. Oh my gosh, someone's calling me. I hate these watches, by the way. I don't know why I'm wearing this. But yeah, so Ragdoll doesn't like this, right? It doesn't like all these crazy pieces, so what you need to do is you got to get rid of everything. So step 1, get rid of everything you don't need. Now, the Ragdoll, well, you're going to see that like typically when you make your Ragdoll, there's a node that constructs your Ragdoll model automatically, but you can actually give it any kind of geometry you want. You don't have to rely on that node to make the geometry for you. You can make your own geometry. So what I'm doing is I just need that centerpiece, right? In case the doll, you know, bumps up against the edge as it's coming up. So I'm just removing everything I don't need. And then for the doll, it's kind of the same thing. I just switch the doll to something much simpler. You know, I'm getting rid of the little bells, the little neck frill, all the little thread, the buttons, all that stuff. So once I have that simplified model, I just drop down in Apex, configure Ragdoll recipe, which just has everything all set up and pre-configured, right? So all you have to do is just kind of run through the recipe bit by bit. And yeah, and you can get your Ragdoll. So here's the simplified model, right? In all of its glory. So then within that recipe, I just went through and just took that custom Ragdoll and just switched it. Boom. So I'm just modifying the recipe. So no problem. The recipes are there for that. You guys can always go through and modify them. So here's the fun part. I go through and just start animating my model. So what I like to do with this is I like to put each limb section on its own layer, right? So I'm putting arms, spine, dress, hat, everything on its own layer. And this is a nice way to work because if you start running your Ragdoll and you're finding that it's too floppy, it's too loose, you don't really need to change your animation. All you need to do is just drop the weight of the layer, and that'll stiffen up your Ragdoll. So it's just a nice organized way to work. And now I'm just running through the recipe, and the recipe just does everything else, right? Configures joint limits, turns everything into a motion clip, and boom, I got my Ragdoll. So the Ragdoll is looking for the joints, and it's looking for the geometry, right? So all the joints are configured, have that simplified geometry coming in, and then it automatically creates the Ragdoll geometry for you. So when the Ragdoll's finished, I need to start thinking about how I'm going to animate this. And the bulk of the work is going to be done using set-driven keys, or at least that really simple animation part. So again, we can start with a recipe. So the way the SDK component works is through layers with an Apex rig pose node, right? They work together in tandem. So the way this works is you just, like you're animating, you select the control, put it into a new layer, and you just start animating away. And in this case, I'm just doing a really, really simple box opening animation, so nothing too crazy. And the animations can be as crazy as you want. I don't know if you saw Esther's talk yesterday, but they can be really wild. Like, so in this case, all I'm doing is I'm using the SDK component to give myself sort of like a rest pose, right? So I can stuff the doll inside of the box, because I don't want to have to do this every time I want to stuff the doll inside of the box. I just have this one SDK that I can just slide back and forth and just close it up. So now I can jump into the auto rig component, right, where I'm actually using that SDK component, and then I just look for those animation layers, and it automatically creates a slider per layer, right? So now you can see here I have 2 sliders, and I can open it up, I can close the doll. But what's great here is that you're not limited to just sliders. You can actually use controls in your rig to fire off these set-driven keys, right? So here I'm grabbing the crank. I'm looking for the rotation X value. So here you can see it's going way too fast because it's going from 0 to 1, right? So what I'm doing is I'm cranking it a bunch. I'm going to grab that value, right, that rotation value. I'm going to put that into my minimum, rotate a little bit more, and then grab that again, and then put that into my maximum, right? So once it gets to that point, it starts the animation, and then as it goes down, it finishes it, right? So I rotate it a whole bunch of times, and then it opens, just like a real crank, right? So now we have everything we need to complete the actual animation. So to start, I'm going to stuff the doll inside of the box, right? As I was saying before, I open the box. I don't know why, but I just did that. And so yeah, with the SDK, I close it up, and then I grab the spline control, drop it down, put it inside of the box. So now it's a very simple animation. It's literally just one keyframe, just keyframe it at the bottom and then move it up. And then the next keyframe I'm going to be using is the actual SDK, right? That slider. So now the doll opens up, and I can see it's kind of like intersecting with the box a little bit, so I can go and just kind of drag it back a little bit, and then it comes up, and then boom. That's my base animation, and that's what's going to be used to drive everything else afterwards. So now I can actually go in and start using one of the new features, which is the secondary motion. And here, there's a couple of different types of secondary motion, right? And in this case, I'm going to use the spring secondary motion. And once I put it on, I notice that it's way too strong. So I could just go in and turn up dampening to about 4, I think it was. And I get a result that I like. So now I'm going to grab that control and bake everything to a new layer, right? So I select my frame range, grab the control, bake it, and then it's going to go into a new layer, right? Bake the keys, boom. So now I have that new layer. And now I can use that to drive everything else, right? Which is going to be the Ragdoll. Now, this is the trickiest part of this whole process, right? Because you're, in a way, how do I even put this? You're playing with like physics simulations, you know what I mean? So you're running that RB sim, but you're trying to kind of have artistic control over it. And what's great about this is that, you can bake, you have your layer, you bake, you have your layer, you set keyframes. So not only are you working with these physics simulations, but you have a ton of control of how strong they are when they show up. So let's go ahead and look at how to do this, or rather how I did this. So I only want to use the Ragdoll for a split second. So I have to turn it on at just the right time, right? So here I'm looking for that frame where I want to turn it on. So I find that frame, and I select the just the Ragdoll controls that I want to initialize, and I just set those keyframes, right? So boom, Ragdoll turns on. So as I mentioned, I only want to use a small portion of this, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take that animation and just bake it to a new layer. And then once I have that on my control rig, so see, now it's on my control rig. And that's all just, that's why I never had to do anything with the doll. It's all just FK, right? So now that I have that on an animation layer, I can start playing with the actual weight of that animation layer. So again, this is just a lot of finesse, right? Like I'm kind of playing with that ragdoll sim that I made, and I'm sort of looking for that position. Like I really want her arms to kind of be flying up in the air. So I'm kind of going back and forth, and I'm trying to get that pose from the ragdoll, right? And then I'm going to snap it back to that rest pose. And then when I snap it back, that's when I'm going to start adding more dynamic motion on top of that, which is secondary motion again. So I select all of the controls, and you can see the effect is way too strong, right? I mean, this is the spring effect, right? So, but of course, you know, we got all these tools to control this. So I just drop the blend value down to 0, and then I can just keyframe it back up as much as I want, right? And I'm leaving this pretty strong on purpose because, again, at every step of the process, you have control over this, right? So I go ahead, I'm going to select, and see, you know, I can turn things off. I can turn it off in the neck. At one point, I turn it off in the spine, right? So again, you're working with dynamic motion. You're working with sort of physics simulations, but you have a lot of control over the final product. You're never locked into anything, really. So I'm going to go ahead and bake everything, right? But the thing is that like the final result is still very strong. So yeah, you can see it's way over the top. But that's kind of on purpose, right? Because I want to have something I can then play with later. So I put all that into another layer. And then the same thing that I did with the ragdoll, I just go back in and I start messing with the layer weights. You see? So again, a lot of finesse here, looking for the point where the ragdoll finishes, and then I want to initialize that secondary motion, right? So kind of interesting. It's you're layering these different effects, right? Procedural motion. You're layering these different procedural motions, and each animation is being dynamically driven by the previous animation, right? But since everything is baked onto layers, you, like I said about a million times, is you have full artistic control over the final result. So you're never, like I said, you're never locked into anything. You can always turn things on and off, do it again. It's pretty forgiving. But of course, we're missing that cranking animation from the beginning, right? Because yeah, what's a Jack in the Box without the, you know, anticipation? So to get that cranking animation, what I'm going to do is within my scene animate, I can go ahead and just create a new clip, which is a really, really nice function. So now we can have multiple clips on a single scene animate node. So I go ahead and create the new clip, and then let's see, I drag that back in. And then all I really need to do to get this motion, since I created that set-driven key before, is just set a couple keyframes and just rotate the crank a bunch of times, as you would in real life, which is kind of cool. So I just set that keyframe. I look for the right position. I rotate it back a little bit so it's a little bit faster. And then I let it play out. And then I have this beautiful cranking animation. So once I have that, I can put everything into a motion mixer. And then once I'm in the motion mixer, you can see up top there that I have access to all the animations that exist in my scene animate, right? So this is pretty simple compared to what Sasha had. I only have like 2 animations in there. But this is all I needed. So I just dropped those in. And again, it's this kind of finesse thing, right? Where it's up to you to kind of find the right timing and to kind of blend these 2 animations together. And then, yeah, I think I was pretty happy with that. So again, here's the final animations, the final animation with all those elements in place, right? So ragdoll, secondary motion, and set-driven keys. All right, cool. That's my talk, guys. Any questions?
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thanks.
From yesterday's keynote, I remember during the Apex demonstration, there's mention of MCP, and I don't know if that's the right term, but improved MCP dictionary for more efficient token use in LLM. I'm just wondering if I know this is not related to the talk, but I'm just wondering if this is specific to Apex or in Houdini in general.
Well, the MCP server that you saw yesterday, that is specific to Apex. Yeah. And so it's specific to Apex rigging. So yeah, it's kind of like in short, the idea would be that you can vibe code a rig. That's kind of, so it's kind of like creating a rig with plain English, really. Make this, make that. Yeah. But not just a rig, but also components as well. Because again, Apex is all-purpose execution. So it's a lot of it has to do with rigging, like the way that we're teaching it is based in rigging. But Apex can be extended into other things, like a bridge tool or something, or a building generator, right? So yeah, we taught this model or this agent, Apex, so it knows it really well, knows the proper syntax. But yes, yeah, it's mainly based in Apex.
I see. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I think Esther wanted to say something.
Uh-oh. Did I get it wrong?
Yes.
No, just a few specifications. So the MCP is specifically for Apex script, and it is purely operating also in code. So it understands Apex script syntax, it understands various examples. Of course, we have a lot of examples in the rigging realm, but it would work for any other setup that you would want to build with Apex. But the overall framework is, because of that, also fairly token light. So we made we had like several iterations to make sure that it actually is fairly robust and token light. And I recently even made a few tests where you actually even try it with like cheaper models, and you still get a fairly robust result out of it with the because of the harness that we have in place for it. Yeah, if that helps. But yeah, but the communication to Houdini works simply by having like an attribute watcher that kind of communicates the code back to Houdini. That is actually what's happening under the hood, but the rest is fairly lightweight.
One sec.
The reason that I was asking whether it's Apex specific is I've been using MCP server and I reached like the token uses is not sustainable and it's cost way too much. And you mentioned that it was going to be more token efficient yesterday, and that's why I was wondering whether it is just is it just applying to Apex or everything else in Houdini, like I don't know, like HDA or Vex and Solaris. No, okay.
Yes.
Super quick one. I was just wondering, would this work with like live link in other applications like Unreal or anything?
No, we don't have that set up yet. Yeah, but that is a good idea. I was actually just talking with Esther again about doing something like that. But no, that's not set up yet.
Somebody else had a question, I think, or no? Okay, I have 2 plushies to give away. Who is the first who can say what is an SDK? What? In the context of the presentation. Oh, wrong. I think you were next. But I was gonna give you one in. Okay, and what did Max use to get the spring effect on the doll? I think you were first. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. So come on down and I think that's
yeah.
come on down at
throw
the end and collect your plushie.
Okay, yeah.
Are there any more questions, actually? Or... Okay, then that's a wrap. Thank you, Max.
Cool. Thanks, guys.